All right, so today we're gonna be balancing gimbals. So we're gonna go over a very in-depth guide as to how to balance almost any gimbal you could think of. I will be using my DJI RS2. You may have a different brand or model of DJI. It doesn't matter. It should still apply to this. So first things first, you have your camera. So the camera needs to go on your gimbal in some way, shape, or form. And basically it will depend on how long your lens is, how heavy your camera is, and how big everything is essentially. Now, generally you have your base plate adapter that goes on your camera. Sometimes you may just have a tripod mount that goes straight on the camera as well, but most newer gimbals will have a separated piece that goes on your camera, and then you'll have your actual tripod mount that you can take on and off if need be. Now, with the DJI series, sometimes you also get a couple of different models of adapters. This one's a little bit taller, this one's a little bit thinner, and the reason you may want this taller one is because if you have a fat lens like mine here, it actually over extrudes the bottom of the camera. So with that, I may need a taller one, or else my tripod mount will rub against my lens, and that's not a very desirable outcome. So make sure you're using the right height to make sure that your tripod adapter is not touching your lens or rubbing against it. And then lastly, on your actual tripod mount plate, you will also usually have a lens holder adapter. Now I'm gonna put it on the actual tripod plate, and I'm going to tighten it down. So the reason we want this lens mount here, and we wanna press it up against the lens when we tighten it down, other forms may be a little bit different, but you wanna make sure that you're securing the lens to the tripod mount point. And that is because if you have a heavier lens, like this 85mm lens is quite large, you may find that sometimes the lens and camera may droop, and you'll also be putting a lot of pressure on the base plate if you don't, because it'll be compressing it down and kind of bending your base plate. So the point of this adapter is to make sure that your lens doesn't flex and that your camera doesn't flex. Because if you use a gimbal with a heavier lens and you're not supporting it, it could have minuscule vibrations going up and down while you're using it, and that will cause the gimbal to not be as effective. All right, and then one last thing before you put your camera on the gimbal, this is a super imperative part while you're setting up your gimbal. If you have accessories like your SD cards, your battery, a V-mount, a Raven Eye, or a cable, literally anything you have to add to your camera, even a microphone, make sure you do your full setup before you do your balancing, because literally even something as small as adding a cable can greatly throw off the balance of your gimbal. So we'll start with only unlocking our tilt axis, which is your up and down axis. And so what you're going to do is you're going to move your camera back and forth until you have your camera steady like this. If it falls forward or falls backwards, you wanna make sure it's flat. And we'll come back to this later, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is because we need to fix the height of the camera first, because the height of the camera is going to be our biggest balancing point, and honestly one of the more annoying points to balance. So what we're going to do is keep this unlocked so it moves, and you're gonna tilt it up at a 45-degree angle, or tilt it down, doesn't really matter. If you tilt it up and it doesn't stay, there's a problem. As well as if you tilt it down and it doesn't stay, there's a problem. However, it is staying pretty nicely like this, but it doesn't stay when you lean it up. And so the way to really think about this is when you have it up like this and it falls backwards, that means that this point right here is a little too high up. We need to put it down lower so that it doesn't fall backwards, rather it'll start falling forwards, but obviously we want it to stay. So we're going to move this down just a little bit. That might have been too much. And then we'll try this again. And now you notice it falls really fast, and when I put it facing down, it comes back up. That means this camera is too far down right here. So we're gonna need to fix that until it does the perfect 45-degree angle. So the goal here is to get your camera to do a 45-degree sit and not move, both when you face it up and face it down. And you'll do that by moving this up and down. And these movements are very minuscule. You can move it just a tiny bit, like a millimeter, and it makes a huge difference. So right now you can see when I tilt it downwards, it stays, and when I tilt it upwards, it also stays. And that's kind of the goal we're going for here. I mean, I can tilt it at almost any angle and it stays and it doesn't go crazy, and that's exactly where we want it to be. Now, also, when you're done with this up and down portion, you definitely wanna make sure that your camera still stays level when you leave it flat. So if you have it like this and it starts falling down or up, That just means you need to move the camera forward or backwards on the tripod mount, and that will also help you with that. But once you have those two things done, like you can see here, the camera's flat, it's not tilting or anything on its own, and I can lift it up and down and it stays perfectly. That means we have our tilt axis nicely set up, and it's a really solid balance on that. Next step is your roll axis. Now this axis is a little more kind of difficult, but I have some tricks for you to kind of help you with that. So basically we'll lock all of our axis except for the tilt or the roll axis, just to make sure that it's easier to balance. And the goal honestly here is to just get it to always return back to center. But ideally, if you could get it at a 45-degree angle and have it stay still, that would be the most ideal situation. But 90% of the time, you're probably not gonna get it to sit like that. So what you're gonna wanna do is just make sure when you roll it, it goes back to center or almost back to center. That means it's pretty well balanced because it's not staying like this or staying like this. If you do notice that it's staying in one side or the other, you'll just have to adjust it. So if I go too far one way, it falls down like that, and that's obviously not ideal. So we're gonna fix this roll axis until it basically stays still about right there. So now every time I move it like this, it'll come back to center basically almost perfectly, and that's totally fine because there is some friction in the motor, so it won't always be perfect. But once you leave it in the middle and it stays, that's a good sign. And then the last one is the pan axis. This one is a little bit more difficult to kind of understand which way you need to move it, but it is a pretty easy axis. So again, we're gonna lock all of our other axes here, and we're going to unlock the pan axis. And so the way to test this one is you lean it forward or lean it backwards or even side to side. So you wanna lean the gimbal forward and you wanna lean it backwards. So now, as you can see, when I lean it backwards, the whole gimbal twists away. It did it very slowly though, which is actually a good sign. That means it's pretty close to balanced. But I'll go really unbalanced right here and I'll tilt it, and then it kind of just goes crazy and falls. And if I go backwards, it does the same thing. This means that your pan axis is definitely not balanced correctly. So the goal here is to move this axis a little bit at a time, tilt it forward pretty aggressively, see if it kind of falls left to right, and then also tilt it backwards and see if it tilts as well. As you can see here, I have a really good balance on my pan axis because it refuses to roll as I move my camera. Now it might a little bit because of gravity, but for the most part, you can tell that when I'm doing this, the camera's not going crazy, and I can go left, right, up, down, and it pretty much stays where it needs to be. So realistically, I now have a perfectly balanced gimbal, but there's two more steps you want to take every time you use your gimbal, because this is a super imperative step to make sure that your gimbal is perfectly balanced. All right, so what we're gonna do is turn on the gimbal and make sure you unlock your axes, because it will throw a fit if you don't. And you'll notice the gimbal is up straight. So one way to make sure your gimbal is balanced without doing anything is to just look at the back of your screen if you have one, or look at the app or something along those lines. It should show you different colors or different parameters that tell you if it's mad or not about a certain axis being out of whack. Is going to be your balance parameters or your strength parameters of your motors. In the DJI, it's called your motor parameters. In other gimbals, it may be something else. So you're gonna wanna go to your motor parameters where the strength of the motors will be. And then on DJI, it's called Auto Tune. It's pretty similar in other brands as well. And I'm gonna hit Auto Tune. And what this does is it wiggles the gimbal around, and it tries to figure out the best motor strengths for the setup that you have. Because the heavier setup you have, the stronger the motors need to be able to handle that weight. So if you don't do this auto tune step, you may notice that when you're using the gimbal that it has like a wobble to it if the motors are too weak, or if they're too tight, you'll notice like a really tight shake to it because it's too strong for the weight that the camera is on there. So you wanna make sure that you do this auto tune every single time, even if you're using the same setup, because even if you add like a cable, it could throw off one of the motor parameters to make sure that it's not strong enough or it's too strong. So that is first step, because we already know it's balanced. Second step is a balance test. You always want to do a balance test in the gimbal or on the app, because this is going to confirm with you that you have balanced your gimbal. Because if it's not 100% balanced, you definitely need to fix it. So what we're going to do, and most gimbals will have you do the same thing, is we'll go to the balance test. You're going to need to tilt your gimbal on its on its side, at least 25 degrees or so, and then begin the test. And then it'll do kind of its own thing here. And then once the gimbal is done running its balance test, it'll tell you either on the gimbal or on the app if it is balanced on each parameter. So on DJI, it'll tell you for each axis if it's good, excellent, bad, needs to be recalibrated, etc. And if it does, then you'll have to do that, which I did this on purpose here. You can see that it says my pan axis needs to be rebalanced because I didn't properly balance my pan axis. So I'm going to fix that, and then I will redo the balance test, and then you'll see that it'll say excellent. So now you can see that it says all excellent in all axes. I just wanted to show you what it looks like when it's not balanced correctly and what your gimbal will do. So basically, that is the in-depth tutorial on how to balance your gimbal all around. Everything you probably need to know to balance it to make sure that it's properly, done and that everything will go smoothly once you're using it. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on gimbals by themselves and their features, you let me know in the comment section down below. Otherwise, hit the subscribe button to see some more videos like this in the future. But other than that, I will see you guys on the next video.